get started. Michael Pedersen. A year or so ago, we went into the elementary schools to try to add a prevention component to our department. Up to that point, and prior to Judge Puccinelli coming on board to supervise this department, we were all reactive. We didn't do a lot of prevention type of things. But as Jennifer Spencer had mentioned, educating is a huge tool. Katie Kirk a couple years ago said about 1 in every 3 kids has experienced some type of cyberbullying. And I thought it was interesting, Judge Boyd was saying that it has no age limit. The case with Megan Myers in Missouri, or where she lives, started out with a mother deciding to pose as a 16-year-old boy to try to get in favor with this girl, and then she turned on her. And so this isn't happening just with kids. And so when we go into the elementary schools, we're trying to let kids know what they do and what they say, whether they're doing that in person or whether they're doing it through the internet, can cause some pretty damaging mental scars. And what we specifically do in the elementary schools, and we're trying to get to all of them in this area, is we're trying to teach the kids the 7 habits that Stephen Covey used in his program. And one of those specifically is trying to build their self-esteem and trying to build others by the way that they treat them. And if we wait until we teach this in high school, they've lost all kinds of years in practicing this. So we're addressing this at the 3rd grade level, 4th grade level, 5th grade level, in hopes that we can change some type of behavior. Judge?
We are seeing this issue come up more and more in the court context. We're seeing it present itself in a variety of, in terms of restraining order applications and the like that are presented to the court. I'll just cite one sort of a generic example that we've seen recently. Is we have occasions where we have fights that are taking place at school. And there's oftentimes collaboration that goes on between different students, and there may be some ongoing conflict between a group of students. And we actually had a recent case where we had some collaboration taking place between various students, where one of the students had been picked on by another student, so she arranged for some of her friends to go and attack this other student, while one of the friends was filming the entire incident on her cell phone. And immediately following the incident, that was then distributed out over the internet to various other cell phones and posted to various electronic sites. And the reality is, I think this has been mentioned too by some of the other panelists, is that once that send button has been hit, there's no taking that back, and when it's launched out into cyberspace, it gets disseminated to a variety of persons, and there's no way of undoing what's been done. So we're certainly seeing it being quite pervasive. I'll take issue a little bit with the comments from Reno, in that I think it's probably much more pervasive than we realize. I think sometimes our enforcement mechanism, or our ability to sort of detect when that's taking place, is not as up to speed as maybe where we need to be, but it's certainly beginning to be more and more of a problem, and the court is seeing it present itself quite frequently now.
Judge, before we move on to Christy, we're limiting our time for questions from your courtroom, and I do want to toss a couple of questions out for perhaps Christy to consider, or the rest of your panel. Do you have to have more? Go ahead, Judge.
We have a question from a student that's actually, and he's willing to come on camera. If you'll identify yourself.
Let's do it.
I'm William Bourget. I'm a senior at Elko High School, and my question is, where do we draw the line between an opinion that is protected by the First Amendment and something such as cyberbullying?
This young man wants to be a lawyer, so you can probably tell that question.
Mason?
Okay, I'll attempt to dive in here. I think you get into a little bit of a dicey area. I think in terms of when it amounts to a pattern of harassment, I think is where we draw the line in terms of wanting to step in and stop that behavior. I think obviously we have free speech implications here in terms of these restrictions that we put into place, but I think when that amounts to a pattern of conduct that's intended to harass and intimidate the other party, then we've crossed the line from what is protected free speech into an area that's not protected.
opinions, free speech is paramount in this country, and we protect that. But we're not allowed to cry fire in a crowded theater. We're not allowed to threaten people. We're not allowed to necessarily make absolutely liable statements about people. But if you're having a lively discussion and disagreeing, that's fine. But and I agree with what Judge Simons is saying, is if you have a pattern of harassment going on that tends to be on the vulgar side, that you potentially have crossed the line. But that's a fine line to draw from, and scholars have argued about that for years, believe me. In any event, that's a very good question.
Before we leave the subject of cyberbullying, 2 questions have come in that I will toss to anyone who wishes to respond on any of our panels. Number 1, why can't messages be fully deleted? And number 2, do you have to do more than 1 episode of cyberbullying in order for the conduct or the action to be subject to criminal penalties? I'll toss that to any panel member who wishes to respond.
Justice Seda, this is Judge Steinheimer in Reno, and one of my panel members has a comment on that. The first question.
Hello, this is Ryan Sullivan. As far as why can't the messages ever be deleted, I think that our internet systems and our cell phone networks are so complex, and there are so many systems of backup that those businesses use, that maybe you did delete it off your computer screen, but that is stored somewhere else, and it can be retrieved by others. And there are detectives who have made their careers out of finding and retrieving these types of messages and information. So I think the answer really is no. You can never be sure that these are completely deleted and that they can be tracked down in some form. I understand there are new applications now that are coming out that are claiming that if you and the other user on the other side have this application, can be deleted. But I think that the real answer is they're out there somewhere, and that a good detective can track them down.
I wanted to respond to question number 2, whether one act was sufficient or a course of conduct was required. And the answer to that question depends on the statute that you are enforcing. We have stalking statutes that say that you need a course of conduct, but the behavior only has to be harassing. It doesn't have to be a threat. But if you make a single threat, that is a sufficient violation of the law for us to prosecute. So it depends on the statute. The more serious and the more direct the threat is, the more likely you are to be prosecuted for a single act.
Justice Seda, here in Carson City, Judge Spoo would also like to respond.
Please, Judge.
Thank you, Justice Spirigari, Justice Seda. We've been hitting all around the new statute, which, as pointed out, will be effective July 1. But I think it might be interesting just to read it very briefly into the record. Bullying and cyberbullying is further defined as bullying, means a willful act or course of conduct on the part of one or more pupils which is not authorized by law. This is from some of the educational chapters of NRS, and which exposes a pupil repeatedly and over time to one or more negative actions which is highly offensive to a reasonable person and is intended to cause and actually causes the pupil to suffer harm or serious emotional distress. That's the new definition which will become effective, and I think it's pertinent to what we've been discussing. Thank you.
Principal Lee.
I just want to say, too, that the purpose for schools is to educate. And one of the things that are first and foremost is safety and security of the students. So when cyberbullying becomes an issue at school, it's much broader than just 1 or 2 individuals. It can impact everybody. And so we deal with those things, but it's nice to have laws behind it to reinforce it.